The sun hung low over the western horizon, painting the vast prairie in shades of amber and rust. Luke Morgan rode alone through this endless sea of grass, his weathered hat pulled low against the evening glare. The rhythmic clip-clop of his horse's hooves on the hard-packed earth was the only sound save for the whisper of wind through the buffalo grass. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, following the Rio Blanco's winding course northward. The river cut through the landscape like a silver snake, its waters catching the dying light. Luke preferred the solitude, had grown accustomed to it these past 5 years since the Apache raid that took everything from him. His wife, Sarah, their boy, Tommy, his parents, all gone in a single night of fire and blood. The memories still haunted him, especially in the quiet hours before dawn. The red rock formations rose on either side of the river valley, ancient sentinels carved by wind and time. Their shadows grew long as evening approached, creating pockets of cool darkness where rattlesnakes might coil. Luke's horse, a sturdy bay named Scout, picked his way carefully along the rocky trail. They'd traveled this route before, knew its dangers and its promises. A coyote's howl echoed across the canyon, soon answered by another from a distant ridge. The sound made Scout's ears twitch nervously, but Luke patted the horse's neck with a calloused hand. "Easy, boy. Just old friends talking." The river grew louder as they approached Whitehorse Rapids, where the Rio Blanco narrowed between massive boulders. The water churned white and violent through the rocky gauntlet, creating a roar that drowned out all other sounds. Luke had always given the rapids a wide berth. Too many men had underestimated their power and paid with their lives. He was about to guide Scout away from the river's edge when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the rapids' constant thunder. A human voice, high and desperate, cutting through the water's rage. Luke pulled Scout to a halt, standing in his stirrups to scan the churning waters. There, caught in the merciless current, a figure struggled against the rapid's grip. Dark hair streamed in the water. Brown arms flailed desperately for purchase on the slick rocks. The person, Luke could see now it was a woman, was being swept toward the worst section of rapids, where jagged rocks waited like teeth. Without thinking, Luke swung down from Scout's back, his boots hitting the ground hard. He stripped off his gun belt and jacket in swift movements, knowing the weight would drag him down. The woman's head disappeared beneath the foam, then surfaced again. Gasping, Luke plunged into the icy water. The current hit him like a charging bull, trying to sweep his feet from under him. He fought forward, using the rocks as handholds, the water pounding against his chest. His boots slipped on the algae-covered stones, but he pressed on, closing the distance. The woman went under again, longer this time. Luke dove forward, letting the current carry him toward where he'd last seen her. His hand caught fabric buckskin, he realized, and he pulled hard. Her body came up against his, limp but still breathing, fighting the river's pull. Luke dragged them both toward the shallows. His muscles burned with effort, lungs screaming for air. Twice the current nearly tore her from his grasp, but he held on with desperate strength. Finally, his boots found purchase on a gravel bar, and he hauled them both onto the rocky shore. They collapsed on the sun-warmed stones, gasping like landed fish. Luke's chest heaved as he gulped air, water streaming from his clothes. Beside him, the woman coughed violently, expelling river water from her lungs. When she finally raised her head, Luke found himself staring into the darkest eyes he'd ever seen, deep brown, almost black, set in a face of striking beauty. High cheekbones, skin the color of polished copper, full lips now blue with cold. She was Apache, no doubt about it. The traditional dress, though torn by the rapids, the turquoise and silver jewelry at her throat, all marked her as one of the people he'd spent years hating. But in that moment, seeing her shiver in the fading light, all he saw was a young woman who'd nearly drowned. Luke pushed himself to his knees, then stood on unsteady legs. He needed to get his jacket, start a fire before the desert night stole what warmth remained in their bodies. The woman watched him with those intense eyes, a mixture of wariness and something else. Gratitude, perhaps, though pride kept it from her face. When Luke returned with his jacket, she was sitting up, wringing water from her long hair. "Here," he said, holding out the coat. She hesitated, then took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said in accented but clear English. Her voice was hoarse from her ordeal, but it held a musical quality that surprised him. "What's your name?" Luke asked, crouching beside her. "Ayanna." She pulled the jacket tighter, still shivering. "It means eternal blossom. Luke Morgan." He glanced at the rapids, then back at her. "What were you doing in the river?" Her face darkened. "Running?" The single word held volumes. Luke didn't press. He'd done his share of running too. Instead, he gathered driftwood and dry grass, using his flint to coax a flame to life. The fire caught quickly, orange light pushing back the gathering darkness. Ayanna moved closer to the warmth, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. As she sat there, Luke noticed the bruise on her cheek, the scratches on her arms that weren't from the rocks. Someone had hurt her before the river nearly claimed her. The realization stirred something protective in him, a feeling he'd thought dead with his family. "You hurt anywhere?" he asked, noting how she favored her left side. Ayanna shook her head, but when she shifted position, she winced, stubborn. Luke thought, like Sarah had been. The comparison came unbidden, bringing with it the familiar ache of loss. They sat in silence as the stars emerged overhead, the fire crackling between them. Scout had wandered down from the trail, grazing on the sparse grass near the water's edge. The night sounds began: crickets, an owl's hoot, the distant yip of coyotes. Finally, Ayanna spoke. "Why did you save me?" The question caught Luke off guard. "You were drowning. I am Apache, your people and mine." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Luke stared into the fire. "Maybe that's true, but I saw a person in trouble. That's all that mattered in the moment." She studied him with those penetrating eyes. "Most white men would have ridden on." "Maybe." Luke poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I'm not most men." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, you are not." As the fire burned lower, Luke made a decision. "I'm heading north, up to Silver Creek. There's a trading post there. Friendly folks. You're welcome to ride along until you figure out where you're going." Ayanna's spine straightened. "I do not need—" "Not saying you do, but that side's hurting you, and traveling alone out here." He gestured at the vast darkness beyond their small circle of light. "Well, it's foolish for anyone, man or woman." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Perhaps to the trading post." Luke nodded, trying not to show his relief. He stood, brushing dust from his still damp pants. "I'll get my bedroll. You can have it tonight. Ground's hard, and you've been through enough." As he walked to where Scout waited, Luke muttered to himself, half in jest. "Cowboy rescued the Apache beauty from the rapids. Now she won't stop following him everywhere." The words were meant to lighten his own mood, but they carried on the night air. When he returned with the bedroll and his saddlebags, Ayanna was still staring into the fire. Her wet dress had begun to dry, and she'd braided her long hair to keep it from tangling. In the firelight, she looked both vulnerable and fiercely independent, a contradiction that intrigued him more than he cared to admit. "Here," Luke said, laying out the bedroll near the fire but at a respectful distance from where he'd sleep. "There's some jerky and hardtack in the saddlebags if you're hungry." "Thank you, Luke Morgan." The way she said his full name, carefully, as if tasting the words, made something tighten in his chest. As the moon rose over the canyon walls, casting silver light on the still churning rapids, Luke settled against his saddle. He'd sleep light tonight, one ear tuned for trouble. The woman, Ayanna, was already a complication he hadn't planned for, but as he watched her curl into his bedroll, still wearing his jacket, he couldn't bring himself to regret pulling her from the river. The night deepened, and the fire burned low. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, lonely and wild. Luke touched the pocket where he kept Sarah's photograph, a ritual he performed each night, for the first time in years. The gesture brought not just pain, but something else, a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, under the vast western sky, two souls touched by loss had found an unexpected moment of grace. Dawn came slowly to the canyon, painting the red rocks in shades of rose and gold. Luke woke to find his bedroll empty, Ayanna nowhere in sight. His jacket lay neatly folded where she'd slept. For a moment, he felt an unexpected disappointment. She'd left without a word. Then he saw her. She stood at the river's edge, silhouetted against the morning light, her torn dress fluttering in the breeze. She'd washed the dirt and blood from her face, and her hair hung loose down her back, still damp from the river. She was singing softly in Apache, a morning prayer or perhaps a song of mourning. Luke busied himself with breaking camp, trying not to watch her, but his eyes kept straying back. When she finally turned from the river, their gazes met. She didn't smile, but something in her expression had softened from the night before. "Morning," Luke said, handing her a cup of coffee he'd brewed over the rekindled fire. She took it with both hands, inhaling the steam. "You make strong coffee. Only way I know how." He poured himself a cup and leaned against a boulder. "Sleep all right? Better than the ground." A pause. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, hardtack soaked in coffee, strips of jerky. Luke noticed how she ate slowly, savoring each bite like someone who'd gone hungry recently. When they'd finished, he stood and dusted off his pants. "Well, I'll be heading north now. The trading post is about 2 days' ride." He moved toward Scout, checking the saddle's cinch. Ayanna rose gracefully, his jacket still around her shoulders. She walked to where he stood with his horse, then past him, heading north along the trail. Luke watched, bemused, as she picked her way carefully over the rocks in her torn moccasins. "Where are you going?" he called after her. She glanced back. "North, to the trading post." "On foot? With no supplies?" She lifted her chin. "I have walked farther with less." Luke rubbed his jaw, feeling the stubble there. The woman was either brave or foolish. Probably both. He swung up into Scout's saddle and nudged the horse forward until he drew alongside her. "At least ride with me. That side's still hurting you. I can see it in how you're walking. I do not need your pity. Luke Morgan." "It's not pity. It's common sense." He extended his hand down to her. "Unless you're too proud to accept help freely given." Her eyes flashed at that, and for a moment he thought she'd refuse out of sheer stubbornness. Then she reached up and grasped his hand, allowing him to pull her up behind him on Scout. She settled onto the horse's back with natural ease, though she kept space between them, her hands gripping the cantle rather than his waist. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, the trail winding through stands of juniper and piñon pine. The air warmed quickly, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals that rose from the heating earth. "Why were you in the river?" Luke asked eventually. He felt her tense behind him. "I told you, running." "From what?" She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Men came to our camp, white men, looking for gold they claimed was hidden in our sacred caves. When we told them there was no gold, they—" Her voice caught. "They killed many. My father, my mother, my younger brother. I escaped only because I was gathering herbs by the river." Luke's hands tightened on the reins. He knew too well the pain in her voice. "I'm sorry." "Why? You did not kill them." "No, but I know what it's like to lose family to violence." The words came hard. "Apaches killed mine 5 years ago." He felt her sharp intake of breath. "And yet you saved me. Death is death. Loss is loss. Doesn't matter who's doing the killing. The pain's the same." They rode on, the weight of shared grief heavy between them. The trail began to climb, switchbacking up the canyon wall. Scout picked his way carefully, sure-footed despite carrying 2 riders. At the top, they paused to rest the horse and take in the view. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, mesas and buttes rising from the desert floor, purple mountains distant on the horizon. It was beautiful and merciless, this land that gave and took with equal indifference. Ayanna slid down from Scout's back, moving stiffly. She walked to a flat rock and sat, gazing out at the vastness. Luke dismounted and joined her, keeping a respectful distance. "The men who attacked your camp," he said, "they still following you?" "Perhaps. I covered my tracks well, and the river—" She gestured back the way they'd come. "They may think I drowned. But you're not sure." She shook her head. "Their leader, a man named Hayes. He is like a wolf. Once he catches a scent, he does not give up." Luke filed the name away. "How many?" 6, maybe 7. They had been drinking whiskey, celebrating finding what they called Apache gold. Her voice turned bitter. "Old coins and trinkets, sacred to my people but worthless to anyone else. They killed for nothing. Men like that don't need much reason." Luke offered her his water canteen. "If they're still tracking you, they'll pick up our trail eventually. Scout's shoes leave clear marks." She drank deeply, then handed the canteen back. "Then I should go my own way. This is not your fight. Maybe not, but I'm headed north anyway, and 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. He stood, stretching muscles stiff from riding. "Besides, you try walking to Silver Creek in those moccasins. You'll be barefoot by nightfall." That almost brought a smile. Almost. She rose as well, and they returned to Scout. This time when she mounted behind him. She sat a little closer, though still careful not to touch him more than necessary. The afternoon brought them through a narrow pass where ancient petroglyphs marked the canyon walls. Ayanna studied them as they rode by, murmuring something in Apache. The drawings were old, older than memory. Hunters and prey, spirals representing the cosmos, handprints left by people long dust. "My grandmother used to bring me here," Ayanna said unexpectedly. "She said these marks were made by the first people, before the world changed, before your people came." Luke heard no accusation in her tone, just a statement of fact. World's always changing. That's the one thing that stays the same. They made camp that night in a grove of cottonwoods beside a small spring. Luke had shot a rabbit along the trail, and they roasted it over the fire, the smell of cooking meat making his stomach rumble. Ayanna had found some wild onions and herbs, adding them to the meal. It was the best food he'd had in weeks. "You cook well," she said, licking grease from her fingers. "Had to learn. Man can't live on jerky and beans forever, though Lord knows I've tried." She studied him across the fire. "You are different from other white men I have known." "How's that?" "You do not look at me with hunger or hatred. You do not try to touch me or own me. You simply—" She searched for words. "You simply are." Luke poked at the fire, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "I'm just a man trying to get by, same as anyone." "No," her voice was certain. "You carry pain but have not let it make you cruel. That is rare." They sat quietly as darkness fell. The spring gurgled softly nearby, and somewhere an owl called. Luke found himself oddly content, despite the circumstances. It had been a long time since he'd shared a campfire with anyone. Longer still since that anyone had been a woman. "I should stand watch," he said eventually. "If Hayes and his men are following, I will take second watch." When he started to protest, she fixed him with those dark eyes. "I am not some fragile flower. Luke Morgan, I can shoot, I can track, I can fight if needed. My father made sure of that." "All right." He handed her his rifle. "You know how to use this?" She examined the Winchester with expert hands, checking the action and sighting down the barrel. "Yes." "Good. Wake me at midnight." But sleep didn't come easily. Luke lay listening to the night sounds, acutely aware of Ayanna's presence just yards away. She sat cross-legged by the fire, the rifle across her lap, alert and watchful, in profile, lit by firelight. She looked like something out of an ancient story, a warrior woman guarding the night. When she woke him for his watch, her hand on his shoulder was gentle. "All quiet," she whispered. He sat up, noting she'd kept the fire low, just enough for warmth but not enough to be seen from a distance. Smart. She settled into his vacated bedroll without a word, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Luke took up position where she'd been sitting, the rifle familiar in his hands. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time's passage. He thought about the strange turns life took, how yesterday he'd been riding alone, content in his solitude, and now he was protecting an Apache woman from men who'd murdered her family. The irony wasn't lost on him. Near dawn, he heard it, the soft nicker of a horse that wasn't Scout. Luke was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. He moved to where Ayanna slept and touched her shoulder. Her eyes opened immediately. Alert. Company? He breathed. She rose silently, and they moved together into the deeper shadows of the cottonwoods. Scout, picketed nearby, stamped nervously. Luke counted heartbeats, watching the lightening sky, waiting. Then he saw them. 3 riders, moving slowly along their back trail. Even in the dim light, Luke could see they were armed and dangerous. They paused at the edge of the cottonwood grove, studying the ground. "Their tracks lead in here," one said. "That's Morgan's horse for sure." Luke felt Ayanna tense beside him. These men knew his name. That wasn't good. The lead rider, a big man with a dark beard, spat tobacco juice. "Spread out. If that Apache witch is with him, I want her alive. Hayes has questions for her about where the rest of that gold might be hidden." They began to move into the grove, weapons drawn. Luke calculated odds, distances, cover, 3 against 2, but they had surprise on their side. He glanced at Ayanna, saw her nod slightly. She understood. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Scout, God bless him, chose that moment to whinny loudly. The rider's head snapped toward the sound, and Luke knew their time had run out. The gunshot cracked through the dawn air like thunder. Luke had fired high, the bullet splintering bark above the lead rider's head. The 3 men dove for cover, cursing and returning fire wildly into the cottonwoods. "Morgan!" the bearded man shouted. "We got no quarrel with you. Just hand over the Apache woman and ride on." Luke chambered another round. "Can't do that, boys. Why don't you turn around and forget you ever saw us?" More gunfire erupted, bullets whining through the leaves. Luke pushed Ayanna lower behind the thick cottonwood trunk. She had found his revolver in his saddlebags and held it ready, her face calm despite the danger. "You're making a mistake. Morgan," another voice called. "Hayes is offering good money for that squaw. Share the reward. No one has to die." "Already too many dead," Luke called back. He caught movement to his left, one of them trying to flank their position. He fired, forcing the man back into cover. The sun was rising now, painting the grove in long shadows. They couldn't stay pinned down here. Luke's mind raced through options. Scout was 20 yards away, too far to reach under fire. The spring offered some cover to the west, but they'd be exposed, crossing the open ground. Ayanna touched his arm, then pointed up. The cottonwood they sheltered behind had low, thick branches. She mimed climbing, then shooting down at their attackers. Luke nodded. It was risky, but might give them the advantage they needed. He provided covering fire as she swung up into the tree with surprising agility. The torn dress hindered her, but she climbed swiftly, finding a perch 15 feet up where the branches forked. From there, she had a clear view of 2 of their attackers. The revolver barked once, twice. A man yelped and fell from behind his rock, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 opened up on her position, bark and leaves raining down. But she'd already shifted to another branch. Luke used the distraction to move, working his way toward where the wounded man had fallen. He needed to even the odds. The man was trying to crawl to better cover, his shirt darkening with blood. Luke reached him just as he grabbed for his fallen rifle. "Don't!" Luke warned. Rifle trained on him. The man, young, maybe 20, froze. "Toss your guns away. All of them." The wounded man complied, throwing his weapons into the brush. Luke could hear the other 2 shouting, trying to locate Ayanna in the tree. Another shot from above, another curse from below. "This isn't worth dying for, son," Luke told the young man. "Tell your friends to ride on." "Can't," the man gasped, pressing his hand to his shoulder. "Hayes'll kill us if we come back empty-handed. That Apache woman knows where the gold is. Has to." "There is no gold," Luke said. "Just old relics. Nothing worth what you've already paid." More gunfire erupted. Luke heard Ayanna cry out, hit or just startled. He couldn't tell. Anger flared in his chest. He'd seen too much senseless killing, lost too much to violence. "Stay down," he ordered the wounded man, then moved toward the other two attackers. They'd focused all their attention on the tree, giving him the opening he needed. Luke came up behind a scraggly juniper where one man crouched. The fellow never heard him coming. The rifle butt to the back of his head dropped him cold. Luke grabbed the man's guns, tossing them far into the brush. That left the bearded leader. Luke could see him now, reloading behind a fallen log. The man was experienced, careful, checking his surroundings between every few bullets fed into his rifle. "It's over," Luke called. "Your men are down. Ride out while you can." The bearded man laughed harshly. "You think you've won something. Morgan, Hayes has 20 men. He'll hunt you both to the ends of the earth for what that savage knows." A branch cracked overhead. Luke looked up to see Ayanna descending, favoring her left arm. Blood seeped through the sleeve of his jacket she still wore. She'd been hit, though she moved with the same determined grace. The moment of distraction cost him. The bearded man had shifted position, now had a clear shot. Luke saw the rifle swing toward him, saw death in the man's cold eyes. The shot came from above. Ayanna, still halfway down the tree, had fired the revolver one-handed. The bearded man jerked, his rifle firing into the dirt as he stumbled backward. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise replacing the coldness in his eyes. Then he toppled over the log and lay still. Luke rushed to the tree as Ayanna dropped the last few feet. He caught her as her knees buckled, lowering her gently to the ground. The jacket sleeve was soaked with blood, but when he carefully pulled it back, he saw the wound was a graze along her upper arm, painful and bloody, but not life-threatening. "You saved my life," he said, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the wound. "Now we are even." She winced as he tied off the bandage. The others? One dead, two alive but out of the fight. Luke helped her to her feet. "We need to move. If there really are 20 more..." She nodded. "The one who lived, he will tell Hayes we headed north. Then we go east, into the desert." Luke knew it was dangerous. The Chihuahuan desert in late summer was an oven, but it was better than facing overwhelming numbers. They worked quickly. Luke secured the wounded men, leaving them water and their horses but no weapons. The young one watched with frightened eyes as Luke saddled Scout and packed what supplies they could carry. "Tell Hayes that Luke Morgan says to forget about the woman," Luke said. "Tell him if I see him or any of his men again, I won't be firing warning shots." "He won't stop," the young man said. "You don't know Hayes. He's like a rabid dog when he wants something." "Then he'll die like one." Luke helped Ayanna onto Scout, then swung up behind her. This time she leaned back against him. Whether from weakness or trust, he didn't know. They rode hard east, leaving the cottonwoods and spring behind. The landscape changed quickly, green giving way to brown, trees thinning to scattered mesquite and ocotillo. By full daylight, they were in true desert, heat already shimmering off the hardpan. Luke had been this way once before. Years ago, there was water if you knew where to look. Hidden springs and tanajas where rain collected in rock basins. But it would be a hard journey, especially with Ayanna wounded. She hadn't complained once, though he could feel her trembling against him, whether from pain, shock, or the morning's violence. He couldn't say. He found himself admiring her courage. She'd climbed that tree knowing she'd draw fire, had made the shot that saved his life despite her injury. "There's a place I know," he said as Scout picked his way around a cluster of barrel cacti. "Red Rock Springs, about a day's ride. We can rest there, let your arm heal." And then, it was a good question. Luke had been drifting for years, no destination beyond the next town. The next job. Now he had a wounded Apache woman depending on him, killers on their trail, and no clear path forward. "We'll figure it out," he said. "First things first, survive today." The sun climbed higher, brutal in its intensity. They stopped in the meager shade of a limestone outcropping to rest, scout, and drink sparingly from their canteens. Luke rebandaged Ayanna's arm, pleased to see the bleeding had mostly stopped. "You shoot well," she said as he worked. "My father would have respected that. Lot of practice. Too much, maybe." He secured the bandage. "What was he like? Your father?" Her face softened. "Strong, wise. He tried to walk the path of peace, even when others urged war. He said the old ways were ending, that we must adapt or perish." A sad smile. He adapted. It didn't save him. They rode on through the afternoon heat, the desert a furnace around them. Dust devils danced in the distance, and vultures circled lazily overhead. Luke kept checking their back trail, but saw no signs of pursuit. Maybe the survivors had decided discretion was the better part of valor. Maybe. As evening approached, the landscape began to change again. Red sandstone formations rose from the desert floor, carved by wind into fantastic shapes. Shadows pooled in their crevices, promising coolness, and there, tucked into a canyon between two towering rocks, Luke spotted the green that marked Red Rock Springs. The spring was small but reliable, feeding a pool fringed with maidenhair ferns and columbines. They'd have shelter, water, and walls at their back, as safe as anywhere in this unforgiving land. Luke helped Ayanna down, noting how she swayed on her feet. The day had taken its toll. He quickly set up camp while she sat by the pool, trailing her fingers in the cool water. When he'd gotten a fire started and laid out bedrolls, he found her asleep where she sat, head pillowed on her drawn-up knees. Carefully, he lifted her and carried her to the bedroll. She weighed almost nothing, bird bones and fierce spirit. As he laid her down, her eyes fluttered open. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." She studied his face in the dying light. "Why do you help me, Luke Morgan? Truth this time." Luke sat back on his heels, considering. "Maybe because I'm tired of all the killing. Maybe because you remind me that there's still something worth protecting in this world." He stood. "Or maybe I'm just a fool who can't mind his own business." "Not a fool," she murmured, eyes closing again. "A good man trying to remember how to be one." As darkness fell over the desert, Luke sat by the small fire, rifle across his knees. The stars emerged in all their desert brilliance, and somewhere a poor will called its name over and over. He thought about paths, the ones we choose, the ones chosen for us, and the rare moments when we could step from one to another. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hayes wouldn't give up easily, and the desert still stretched between them and any real safety. But tonight, in this small oasis of stone and water, two wounded souls had found a moment's peace. For now, that was enough. 3 days passed at Red Rock Springs. Luke had expected Ayanna to be eager to move on, but she seemed content to rest and heal. Her arm was mending well, the wound clean and already starting to close. She spent her days gathering medicinal plants that grew near the spring, preparing poultices and teas with practiced skill. On the 4th morning, Luke knew that they couldn't delay longer. Their supplies were running low, and staying in one place too long invited discovery. He found Ayanna sitting by the pool, washing her hair in the cool water. "We should move today," he said. "There's a town about 2 days north Cedar Falls. We can get supplies, maybe some information about Hayes and his men." She wrung water from her long hair, considering, "A town will not welcome me. You let me worry about that." Luke had been thinking about this. "I've got some money saved. We'll get you a proper dress. Say you're Mexican if anyone asks. Your English is good enough to pass." "Pretend to be what I am not?" Her voice held an edge. "Survive first, pride second." He softened his tone. "It's not forever, just until we figure out our next move." She stood, water droplets catching the morning light. "And what is our next move? Luke Morgan, You cannot protect me forever. It was the question he'd been avoiding. What was he doing? He'd started out just helping someone in need, but somewhere along the way, things had shifted. The thought of parting ways with Ayanna left an unexpected hollow in his chest. Let's get to Cedar Falls first, he said, one step at a time. They broke camp and headed north, leaving the shelter of the red rocks for open country. The land here rolled in long swells, covered with grama grass and dotted with juniper. It was prettier than the harsh desert, but also more exposed. Luke kept scout to the low places when possible, avoiding skylines. By afternoon, they encountered their first fence-new barbed wire stretching across the trail. A sign proclaimed this to be the property of the Double Bar Ranch. Trespassers unwelcome. Luke cut the wire with his pliers and carefully replaced it after they passed through. No sense making enemies they didn't need. Your people love their fences, Ayanna observed. Not my people, Luke said. I've got no more love for fences than you do. Man should be free to ride where he pleases. Yet you repair their wire. Being free and being foolish are two different things. They made camp that night in a grove of oak trees, the first they'd seen in days. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of coming autumn, as they sat by their small fire. Luke noticed Ayanna kept touching her throat where her necklace had been, lost in the river. He assumed, "Tell me about your family," she said suddenly. "You know my loss. I would know yours." Luke stared into the fire, weighing words. He rarely spoke of them, but somehow, in the darkness, with her quiet presence across from him, the words came. Sarah was my wife, prettiest girl in San Antonio. No idea what she saw in a rough cowhand like me, but she said I made her laugh. He smiled at the memory. We had a boy, Tommy, 4 years old, smart as a whip, always asking questions about everything. And your parents? My folks had a little spread north of town, nothing fancy, but it was home. Ma kept chickens, grew the best tomatoes in the county. Pa was teaching Tommy to ride. His voice caught. Ayanna waited, patient as stone. Apache raiding party hit while I was in town getting supplies. By the time I got back, Luke's hands clenched. Nothing left but ashes and graves to dig. I am sorry. Wasn't your doing. No, but my people killed yours, as your people killed mine. The wheel of sorrow turns and turns. She looked at him across the fire. How do we make it stop? I don't know. Maybe we can't. Maybe all we can do is refuse to push it ourselves. They sat in companionable silence until the fire burned low. When they bedded down, Luke noticed she placed her bedroll closer to his than before, not touching, but within arm's reach. Trust, he realized, precious and fragile as spring ice. The next day brought them to the stage road that led to Cedar Falls. Traffic here was heavier, freight wagons, riders, even a mail coach that passed in a cloud of dust. Each time they encountered others, Luke felt Ayanna tense behind him. But no one paid them much attention, just another travel-worn pair on a hard-used horse. Cedar Falls appeared by late afternoon, a collection of wood and adobe buildings clustered around a main street. It was bigger than Luke expected, maybe 300 souls, with a church steeple at one end and a cemetery at the other. Smoke rose from chimneys, and he could hear the ring of a blacksmith's hammer. Pull your hair forward. Cover your face as much as you can, Luke advised as they approached. Keep your eyes down. Let me do the talking. They rode slowly down Main Street. Luke noted the essentials, general store, hotel, 2 saloons, livery stable, also a sheriff's office, which could be good or bad depending on who wore the star. People went about their business, though a few curious glances followed them. At the general store, Luke helped Ayanna down and they went inside. The proprietor, a thin man with wire spectacles, looked up from his ledger. Help you folks? Need supplies. Luke said, trail food, ammunition, and a dress for the lady. The man's eyes lingered on Ayanna, taking in her torn buckskin dress, her downcast face. Got some ready-made in the back. Mexican seamstress does good work. Luke nodded. While Ayanna looked through the dresses, he gathered supplies. Flour, beans, coffee, salt pork. More than they needed, but he had a feeling they might be traveling hard again soon. "Heard there was some trouble south of here," the shopkeeper said casually. "Apache raids. They're saying..." "That's so?" Luke kept his voice neutral. "Group of men came through yesterday. All shot up. Said they'd been ambushed by a war party. Their leader, fellow named Hayes, is offering good money for information." Luke's hand stilled on a box of ammunition. "What kind of information?" "About a white man traveling with an Apache woman. Says she murdered his partners, stole from them." The shopkeeper adjusted his spectacles. "You haven't seen anyone like that, have you?" "Can't say I have." Luke paid for their goods, careful to keep his expression blank. "We'll take these things. The lady find something?" Ayanna emerged from behind a curtain wearing a simple blue calico dress. It was too big, hanging loose on her slight frame, but it transformed her appearance. With her hair pinned up and a bonnet shadowing her face, she could pass for Mexican or mixed blood. "Beautiful," the shopkeeper said. "Your wife?" "Yes," Luke said without hesitation. "We're headed to California. Fresh start. Well, you be careful out there. Dangerous times." They left quickly, Luke's mind racing. Hayes was ahead of them, spreading lies, turning the town against them before they'd even arrived. They needed to leave, but first they needed information. "Wait here," he told Ayanna, positioning her in the shadow between buildings. "I'm going to visit the saloon, see what else I can learn." She caught his arm. "Be careful." The Broken Spoke saloon was dim and smoky, half full of afternoon drinkers. Luke ordered whiskey and settled at the bar, listening. It didn't take long to hear Hayes' name mentioned. 20 men, he's got. One cowhand was saying. "All armed to the teeth. They're searching every ranch and homestead south of here." "What's he want with one Apache woman?" another asked. "Gold." "What else?" "Says she knows where people hid a fortune in Spanish gold." Luke sipped his whiskey, thinking. Hayes was building a small army, fueled by greed and lies. They couldn't fight those numbers. They had to run. But where? He was turning to leave when the saloon doors swung open. 3 men entered, trail dusty and hard-eyed. Luke recognized one from the grove, the young man he'd left wounded. Their eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the young man's hand dropped to his gun. "That's him! That's Morgan!" Luke's glass shattered against the man's head before he could clear leather. Luke vaulted the bar as guns came out, bottles exploding where he'd been standing. He rolled, came up with his Colt in hand. "Nobody else needs to die," he shouted. But the saloon had erupted in chaos, men diving for cover, chairs crashing, someone screaming about the law. Luke fired twice, driving Hayes' men back toward the door. He needed to get out, get to Ayanna. A window beckoned. He put 2 more shots into the ceiling to keep heads down, then dove through the glass in a shower of shards. He hit the alley hard, rolled to his feet, running. Behind him, men poured from the saloon. A shot tugged at his shirt. Another sparked off a water trough. Ayanna was where he'd left her, eyes wide but calm. He grabbed her hand and they ran, dodging between buildings as shouts rose behind them. Scout was tied at the store's hitching rail. Too far, too exposed. "This way," Ayanna hissed, pulling him into a narrow passage between the church and parsonage. They pressed into the shadows as boots thundered past. "Gotta get to Scout," Luke whispered. "They will be watching." She was right. Through a gap in the buildings, he could see men surrounding his horse. The sheriff had appeared, trying to restore order. But Hayes' men were shouting about Apache murderers and stolen gold. "There," Ayanna pointed to the livery stable. "Other horses." It was theft, but they were past caring. They slipped through back alleys, using the growing twilight as cover. The stable's rear door was open. Inside, horses stamped nervously, sensing the excitement. Luke quickly saddled 2 mounts, a gray mare and a black gelding that looked like they had bottom. He was tightening the second cinch when footsteps approached. "Going somewhere?" The sheriff stood in the doorway, gun drawn but not quite pointed at them. He was older, weathered, with intelligent eyes that took in Ayanna's face beneath the bonnet. "Sheriff, "I can explain," Luke began. "No need. I heard Hayes's version. Also heard from a young fellow with a shoulder wound who seemed mighty confused about who shot who." The sheriff holstered his gun. "I've got no love for Hayes or his kind, but I can't have gunplay in my town." "We're leaving," Luke said. "See that you do? And mister, don't come back. Next time I'll have to do my job." He stepped aside. "Take the horses. Owner owes me a favor." They rode out as darkness fell, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Once clear of town, Luke let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That was close. Too close. Ayanna had shed the bonnet, letting her hair stream free. "They will follow. Let them try. We've got a head start and fresh horses." They rode through the night, pushing hard but not hard enough to wind their mounts. By dawn they were 20 miles from Cedar Falls, climbing into rough country where pursuit would be difficult. Luke finally called a halt in a canyon where a trickle of water fed some cottonwoods. "As they watered the horses," Ayanna said quietly, "you called me your wife. In the store." Luke felt heat rise in his face. Seemed easier than explaining. "Yes." She was quiet a moment. "I did not mind." They stood there in the growing light, the moment stretching between them like a held breath. Then Luke cleared his throat and turned to check the horse's hooves. The spell broken. But something had changed. As they prepared to ride on, Luke caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, and when they mounted up, she chose to ride beside him rather than behind, their knees occasionally brushing as the horses picked their way up the canyon. Behind them, Cedar Falls woke to a new day and the stories of what had happened. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and questions neither was ready to answer. But for now, they rode together into the morning. Two souls bound by circumstance and something deeper that neither yet had words for. The pine forest closed around them like a green cathedral, towering ponderosas filtering the harsh sun into gentle dapples. They'd been climbing for 2 days since Cedar Falls, leaving the desert behind for mountain country. The air was cooler here, sweet with pine resin and the promise of rain. Luke rode ahead, scouting the trail while Ayanna followed on the gray mare. They'd spoken little since the town, both lost in their own thoughts. The higher they climbed, the more Luke's shoulder ached, an old wound from years back that complained about altitude and weather changes. "Storm coming," Ayanna said, reading the sky with practiced eyes. Dark clouds massed over the western peaks, lightning flickering in their depths. Luke nodded. "There's an old trapper's cabin about a mile up. Should still be standing." They pushed the horses harder, racing the storm. The wind picked up, setting the pines to moaning. First drops of rain spattered down, cold and heavy. Then the sky opened like a dam bursting. Within seconds they were soaked through. The trail became a river of mud, the horses slipping and struggling. Lightning crashed nearby, so close Luke could smell the ozone. Ayanna's mare shied, nearly throwing her. Through the driving rain, Luke spotted the cabin, a dark bulk against the trees. It was rough-built but solid, with a stone chimney and thick log walls. The door hung open, banging in the wind. They stumbled inside, leading the horses into what had once been a lean-to stable attached to the main structure. The roof leaked in places, but it was shelter. Luke's hands shook as he unsaddled the horses from cold. He told himself, not from the way Ayanna's wet dress clung to her form. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough table, and a bed frame with moldy remnants of a mattress. Luke found dry wood stacked in a corner, evidence that other travelers had used this shelter. Soon he had a fire crackling, orange light pushing back the storm's gloom. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," he said, not looking at her. "There's blankets in my saddlebags." He stepped outside to give her privacy, standing under the leaking lean-to roof with the horses. The storm raged on, turning afternoon dark as evening. When sufficient time had passed, he knocked on the doorframe. "Come," she called. She sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket, her dress and his blue calico hanging from pegs to dry. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, gleaming in the firelight. Luke tried not to stare as he entered. acutely aware of the intimacy of their situation. He grabbed a blanket for himself and retreated to the far corner to change. When he emerged, she had found an old pot and was heating water for coffee. Domestic, almost like, "Do not," she said without turning around. "Don't what?" "Whatever you were thinking, do not think it." But her voice held amusement rather than warning. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, sipping bitter coffee and listening to the storm. Thunder rolled through the mountains like war drums. In the flashes of lightning, Luke could see Ayana's profile, proud nose, strong jaw, those dark eyes that seemed to see through him. "Tell me about California," she said eventually. "You told the shopkeeper we were going there." Luke shrugged. "Just a story. Though I've thought about it, they say there's good land in the valleys, away from the gold fields. A man could start over, build something. Alone." The question hung between them. Luke studied his coffee as if it held answers. That was the plan. Plans change. "Yes." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "They do." She shifted, wincing slightly. The movement made her blanket slip, revealing the bandage on her arm. Luke frowned. Was that blood seeping through? "Let me see," he said, moving closer. "It is nothing. Ayana." He used the tone that brooked no argument. Reluctantly, she let him examine the wound. It had reopened, probably during their hard riding. The edges looked angry, red. Luke didn't like it. "Needs cleaning and fresh bandaging." He fetched his saddlebags, pulling out the medical supplies he always carried. "This'll hurt. I have had worse." He worked carefully, cleaning the wound with whiskey from his flask. She didn't flinch, though he saw her jaw tighten. This close, he could smell her hair, pine smoke and rain, and something uniquely her. "There," he said, tying off the fresh bandage. His hands lingered a moment on her arm, feeling the warmth of her skin. She turned to face him, and suddenly the space between them seemed very small. Her eyes were deep as midnight pools, drawing him in. Luke felt himself leaning closer, pulled by something stronger than thought. A massive crack of thunder shook the cabin, breaking the spell. They pulled apart, both breathing a little too fast. Luke retreated to his side of the fire, cursing himself for a fool. This was no time for such thoughts, with killers on their trail and uncertainty ahead. But as the storm raged on, he kept stealing glances at her, and more than once, he caught her looking back. Night fell without the storm abating. They made a meal of beans and salt pork, eating in companionable silence. The cabin felt like a world unto itself, separated from all their troubles by walls of wind and rain. "I have been thinking," Ayana said as they cleaned up, "about Hayes and his men. They will not stop coming." "No," Luke agreed. "They won't. Then we must stop running and face them." Luke shook his head. "Too many. It would be suicide. Not in battle. There are other ways." She stared into the fire. "In my village, there was a story. A woman whose family was killed by enemies. She could not fight them with strength, so she used cunning. She let herself be captured, gained their trust, then led them into an ambush. You're not using yourself as bait." Her chin lifted. "It is not your choice." "The hell it isn't." The words came out harsher than intended. "I didn't pull you from that river to watch you throw your life away. And I did not ask you to. I did not ask for any of this." She stood abruptly, the blanket falling away. She wore only her shift underneath, and Luke determinedly kept his eyes on her face. "You saved me, yes, but that does not make me yours to command." "I'm not trying to command you. I'm trying to keep you alive." "Why?" She stepped closer, eyes flashing. "Why does it matter to you if I live or die?" "Because I—" Luke stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Because I care for you. Because losing you would break something in me that's barely mended. Because you've made me remember what it feels like to want to protect someone." She waited, but he couldn't say any of it. Instead, he turned away. "Because it's the right thing to do." "Liar," she said softly. The word should have stung, but there was no accusation in it. Just a gentle acknowledgement of all the things neither of them could say. Not yet. They settled on opposite sides of the room for sleep, the fire burning low between them. Luke lay listening to the storm, to her breathing, to his own conflicted heart. Several times he started to speak, to bridge the gap between them, but the words wouldn't come. Deep in the night, he woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves. Moonlight streamed through cracks in the walls, painting silver lines across the floor. Ayanna was sitting up, arms wrapped around her knees, shivering. The fire had died to embers, and the mountain cold was seeping in. Luke rose quietly and rebuilt the fire, adding wood until flames danced again. "Could not sleep," she said softly. "Bad dreams? Memories?" She stared into the renewed flames. "They come in the quiet times, faces of the dead." Luke understood. He moved to sit beside her, not touching but close enough to share warmth. "They never really leave us, do they?" "No, but perhaps that is good. To forget them would be worse." She turned to look at him. "Do you think they would understand? My family? About this?" "This," she gestured between them. "A white man, their killer's kind. You're not responsible for your people's hate, neither am I." Luke chose his words carefully. "Your father wanted peace, you said. Maybe this is what peace looks like. Two people choosing to see past the blood between their peoples." Pretty words. But she leaned slightly toward him. "Do you believe them?" "I'm trying to." They sat in silence, shoulders almost touching, watching the fire. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, wolves sang to the moon. The world felt large and wild around their small shelter. "Luke," she said eventually, "what happens when we cannot run anymore?" He'd been thinking the same thing. They couldn't stay ahead of Hayes forever. Money would run out, horses would tire, and eventually they'd have to make a stand or find another solution. "There's a fort about a week north," he said. "Fort Buchanan. Military presence might make Hayes think twice. Or we could head for Denver, lose ourselves in a city, and then spend our lives looking over our shoulders. If that's what it takes." She turned to face him fully. "That is not life. That is just slower death." Before he could respond, she placed her hand over his. The touch was electric, sending warmth up his arm. "I am tired of being afraid. Luke, tired of running. Whatever comes, I want to face it. Ace." "Together?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. She squeezed his hand gently. "Together." They stayed that way as the fire burned low again. Hands clasped, neither willing to break the connection. Finally, exhaustion won, and they slept sitting up, leaning against each other for warmth and comfort. Luke woke at dawn to find her head on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. He didn't move, didn't want to disturb this moment of peace. Through the window, he could see the world washed clean by the storm, droplets of water catching the early light like diamonds. She stirred, lifting her head. For a moment she looked confused. Then memory returned. She didn't pull away immediately, and their faces were very close. Luke could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could count her eyelashes. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning." Her voice was husky with sleep. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Then she smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "We should go," she said, but made no move to rise. "We should," he agreed, equally still. Finally, reluctantly, they separated. The day's necessities took over. Tending horses, packing gear, preparing for the trail. But something fundamental had shifted between them in the night. They moved around each other with new awareness, hands brushing as they worked, eyes meeting and holding. As they prepared to mount up, Ayanna caught his arm. "Luke, last night, what you could not say, I understand. The words are hard for me too." He covered her hand with his. "When this is over, when we're safe, then we'll find the words." She nodded. and they rode out into the morning. The trail ahead was uncertain. Danger still pursued them, but they faced it together now. And sometimes, Luke thought as they rode side by side through the dappled forest light, that was enough. The rest, the words, the promises, the future would come when it was time. For now, they had this, the mountain morning, the horses moving in rhythm, and the unspoken understanding that whatever came next, neither would face it alone. The ruins appeared through the morning mist like ghosts of the past, blackened timber frames reaching skyward, adobe walls crumbling back to earth. What had once been a thriving Apache village now stood as a monument to violence and loss. Luke pulled up his horse at the edge of the devastation, feeling Ayanna go rigid behind him. They had taken a detour from their northern route when Ayanna recognized landmarks from her childhood. She'd grown quiet as they approached, and now Luke understood why. This was her home, or what remained of it. "We don't have to go in," he said softly. "Yes," she replied, sliding down from the horse. "We do." She walked slowly through the ruins, her feet knowing the paths even though the buildings were gone. Luke followed at a distance, leading both horses, giving her space to grieve. The morning sun revealed the full extent of the destruction-charred poles that had been homes, scattered pottery shards, the blackened stones of cooking fires long cold. Ayanna stopped at what must have been the center of the village, a ring of stones marked where the council fire had burned. She knelt there, placing her hands flat on the earth, and began to sing in Apache a low, mournful chant that raised the hair on Luke's neck. He'd seen destroyed settlements before, had even participated in some of the burning during his ranger days, but watching Ayanna mourn her people, he felt only shame for the part his kind had played in this endless cycle of violence. She finished her song and remained kneeling, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. Luke approached carefully, as he might a wounded animal, and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. "This is where my mother taught me to weave," she said, gesturing to a collapsed structure. "And there, my father kept his horses. My brother—" Her voice broke. "My brother was learning to work silver. He was 12. Luke knelt beside her, not speaking. Sometimes grief needed witness more than words. They came at dawn. She continued. "I had gone to gather herbs by the stream. I heard the shooting, the screams. I hid in the rocks like a coward while my people died. Living isn't cowardice." Luke said, "You couldn't have changed anything by dying with them." "Perhaps, but the guilt remains." She picked up a handful of ash and let it sift through her fingers. Hayes and his men were looking for gold that does not exist. Old Spanish coins my grandfather found years ago, traded away long before. They tortured our elders for information about treasure that was already gone. Luke's jaw tightened. He'd known men like Hayes all his life, those who saw other people's lives as obstacles to their greed. "I'm sorry, Ayanna, for all of it." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You did not do this." "My people did. Isn't that the same?" "No." She touched his face gently. "You are learning what I am learning, that my people and your people are words that divide. There are only people, good and bad, kind and cruel." They stayed among the ruins as the sun climbed higher. Ayanna moved from place to place, touching a stone here, a piece of wood there, gathering memories. At what had been her family's home, she found something in the ashes, a small silver charm, blackened but intact. "My mother's," she whispered, clutching it tight. "She wore it always." Luke helped her search for other remnants, but little had survived the fire. They found a few more pieces of silverwork, some ceramic shards with distinctive patterns, a knife blade without its handle. Each item Ayanna wrapped carefully and placed in her saddlebags. Near noon, they heard horses approaching. Luke's hand went to his gun, but Ayanna touched his arm. "Wait." 3 riders appeared through the ruins, Apache warriors, rifles across their saddles. They pulled up short at seeing Luke, weapons rising. Ayanna stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Apache. The lead warrior, a man with gray streaking his long hair, answered harshly. The conversation grew heated. Luke caught Ayanna's name, saw the warrior's eyes flick between her and him with suspicion and anger. His hand stayed near his Colt, though he knew drawing would mean death for them both. Finally, the gray-haired warrior dismounted. He embraced Ayanna briefly, then turned to Luke with cold eyes and spoke in accented English. "You are the white man who saved Winterflower's daughter." Luke blinked. Winterflower? Ayanna's mother. "I pulled her from the river, yes. She tells us you protect her from the killers who did this." He gestured at the ruins. "Why would a white man do this?" "Because it was right." The warrior studied him for a long moment. "I am Joseph Crowfeather. I knew Ayanna as a child. We have been tracking the men who destroyed our village. They are close, less than a day's ride north." Luke's pulse quickened. "How many?" 15, maybe 20. They make camp at Skeleton Canyon." Joseph's smile was grim. "Good place for killing. The rocks hide many warriors. You're planning an ambush." "Justice," Joseph corrected. "Will you stand aside when we take it?" Luke glanced at Ayanna. Her face was carefully neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. This was a test, he realized, not just from Joseph, but from her as well. "The man who leads them wants Ayanna dead," Luke said. "That makes him my enemy too." Joseph nodded slowly. "Then you will fight with us?" "Luke, no." Ayanna said quickly, "This is not your fight. It became my fight the moment I pulled you from that river." He met Joseph's eyes. "Yes, I'll stand with you." The other warriors dismounted, their hostility easing slightly. They spoke with Ayanna in Apache, and Luke caught traces of affection beneath their warrior facades. These were her people, her family's friends. They examined her wounded arm, clicked their tongues at her thinness, glared at Luke as if he were responsible. Plans were made quickly. Joseph's band numbered 12 warriors, all seasoned fighters. With Luke, they had a better chance, but it would still be dangerous. Hayes had more men, better weapons, and wouldn't hesitate to kill. "You could stay here," Luke told Ayanna as they prepared to leave. "Let us handle this." Her look could have melted iron. "They killed my family. I will see justice done." They rode north through the afternoon. Joseph's warriors spread out to avoid leaving too clear a trail. Luke found himself riding beside the Apache leader, an odd companionship born of shared purpose. "You puzzle me, white man," Joseph said. "You dress like a drifter, but you sit a horse like a soldier. You save our daughter, but ask nothing in return. Who are you?" "Just a man trying to find his way," Luke replied, with a heart full of ghosts. Joseph's knowing look was unsettling. "I see it in your eyes. Loss walks with you like a shadow. Doesn't it walk with us all? Perhaps, but some men let it consume them, turn them into creatures like this Hayes. Others," he glanced back at where Ayanna rode, "others find new reasons to live." As evening approached, they reached the approaches to Skeleton Canyon. True to its name, the canyon was littered with white rocks that looked like bones in the fading light. High walls on either side made it a perfect killing ground, or a perfect trap. Joseph's scouts had located Hayes's camp near the canyon's eastern mouth. They'd grown careless, believing themselves the hunters rather than the hunted. Smoke from their fires rose carelessly, and Luke could hear distant laughter. They were drinking, celebrating some successful raid. The warriors gathered in a sheltered grove to plan. Joseph drew in the dirt with his knife, marking positions and approaches. Luke contributed what he knew of Hayes's men, their weapons, their leaders, their likely responses to attack. "We strike at dawn," Joseph decided. "They will be slow from drink, eyes bleared by their fires. Half will take positions in the rocks above. The rest will drive them into the canyon, like herding cattle to slaughter," one warrior said with satisfaction. "What about Ayanna?" Luke asked. "I go where you go," she said firmly. Joseph shook his head. "You are wounded, little flower, and these men want you especially. You will stay with the horses." Ayanna's protests were fierce, but Joseph remained unmoved. Finally, she subsided, though Luke could see the rebellion still burning in her eyes. He'd have to watch her carefully. She was likely to disobey if given the chance. They made a cold camp that night. No fires to give away their position. Luke found himself sitting with Ayanna apart from the others, sharing dried meat and water in the darkness. "You should not fight tomorrow," she said quietly. "This is not your war. It is now." He could barely see her face in the starlight. "I meant what I said to Joseph. Your enemies are mine." "Why?" That question again, soft as a whisper. This time, Luke found the words. "Because somewhere between pulling you from that river and now, you became important to me, more important than playing it safe or minding my own business." Her hand found his in the darkness. "And if you die tomorrow? Then I die fighting for something that matters. Haven't been able to say that in a long time." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, when I was in the river, drowning, I saw my death approaching. I was not afraid, but when you pulled me out, when I breathed again, I was angry. Why save me just to die another day? But now I understand. The river gave me back to life for a reason. To see justice for my people. To find—" She paused. "To find you." Luke squeezed her hand, heart pounding. In a few hours, they'd face death together. But right now, in this moment, they were alive and together, and that was everything. "When this is over," he began. "When this is over," she agreed. "We will have time for words, for plans, for everything we cannot say now." They sat together through the long hours before dawn, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Around them, warriors prepared weapons and made peace with their gods. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Luke found comfort in their eternal dance. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Joseph appeared like a shadow. "It is time." Luke checked his weapons one last time: rifle, pistol, knife. Ayanna helped him adjust his gun belt, her fingers lingering on the buckle. "Come back," she said simply. "I will." She pulled him down and kissed him then, fierce and quick, tasting of tears and promise. Then she pushed him away. "Go! Fight well!" Luke joined the warriors, moving into position, his lips still burning from her kiss. Behind them, Ayanna stood watching, a slender figure against the lightening sky. He raised his hand once in farewell, then turned his face toward Skeleton Canyon and the reckoning that waited with the dawn. The bones of the earth were about to drink blood again. But this time, Luke thought as he checked his rifle one more time, it would be in the cause of justice, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to finally quiet some of the ghosts that haunted them all. Dawn broke over Skeleton Canyon in shades of crimson and gold, painting the white rocks like bloodstains. Luke lay belly down on a limestone ledge, rifle steady, watching Hayes' camp stir to life. Below, men emerged from bedrolls, stretching and cursing the early hour. They moved slowly, heads thick from whiskey, unaware that death watched from the rocks above. Joseph had positioned his warriors perfectly. 6 men commanded the high ground on both canyon walls, while the rest waited with the horses, ready to drive the outlaws into the killing ground. Luke could see Hayes himself, a bear of a man with a black beard, drinking coffee by the largest fire. The signal was a hawk's cry, piercing and wild. Luke centered his sights on a man reaching for his rifle and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and the man spun and fell. Then the rocks erupted with gunfire. Hayes' men scrambled for cover, shouting in confusion. Some ran for their horses, only to find Joseph's mounted warriors charging from the canyon mouth, war cries splitting the air, caught between rifle fire from above and horsemen below. The outlaws had only one choice: deeper into the canyon. Luke worked his Winchester's lever smoothly, picking targets with cold precision. A man taking aim at the Apache riders, down. Another trying to rally his companions, down. The limestone ledge grew hot with spent shells. "Into the canyon," Hayes roared, emptying his pistol at the rocks above. "Move, damn you!" The survivors fled deeper into Skeleton Canyon. Exactly as Joseph had planned. Luke and 3 Apache warriors descended from their positions, pursuing on foot while the mounted warriors circled to the canyon's far end. It was a perfect trap, but desperate men could still be dangerous. The canyon narrowed as it wound through the rock, white stones crunching underfoot. Luke could hear the outlaws ahead, their panicked voices echoing off the walls. Gunfire cracked sporadically as they fired blind behind them. Then Luke rounded a bend and found chaos. The fleeing outlaws had run straight into Joseph's mounted warriors coming from the other direction. The narrow canyon became a battlefield. Men and horses pressed together, gun smoke thick as fog. Luke dove behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. An outlaw charged him, pistol raised. Luke shot from the hip, the man's momentum carrying him forward even as he fell. Another came from the left. Luke swung his rifle like a club, feeling the stock crack against skull. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw Hayes. The big man had found cover behind some fallen rocks, firing steadily, trying to organize resistance. 3 of his men had joined him, creating a pocket of desperate defense. "Morgan!" Hayes spotted him, face twisted with rage. "This is your doing, siding with these savages." Luke didn't waste breath on a reply. He worked his way closer, using cover, trying for a clear shot. An Apache warrior beside him grunted and fell, clutching his side. Luke grabbed the wounded man's rifle, now fighting with a weapon in each hand. The battle was fierce but brief, trapped between 2 forces, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Hayes's men fell one by one. Soon only Hayes and 2 others remained, pressed back against the canyon's dead end. "Surrender," Joseph called out. "Throw down your weapons," Hayes spat. "Go to hell, Redskin. We'll take some of you with us." Luke saw movement on the canyon rim. More Apache warriors had arrived, but these weren't Joseph's men. His blood ran cold as he recognized Ayanna among them, bow in hand, moving along the rocks above Hayes's position. "Damn fool woman," he muttered, trying to keep Hayes pinned while watching her progress. She moved like a shadow, sure-footed on the treacherous rocks. Hayes and his men were focused on the warriors in front of them, unaware of danger above. Luke saw her nock an arrow, draw the bow with fluid grace despite her wounded arm. Hayes must have sensed something. He started to turn, bringing his rifle up. Luke didn't think. He broke cover, charging across open ground. Hayes swung the rifle toward him instead, and Luke saw his own death in the black bore of the barrel. The arrow took Hayes in the shoulder, spinning him around. His shot went wild, sparking off rocks. Luke hit him at full run, both men crashing to the ground. They rolled in the dust, fighting for control of the rifle. Hayes was bigger, stronger, but Luke fought with desperate fury. He got a knee into Hayes's wounded shoulder, making the man howl. The rifle went flying. Both men grabbed for their pistols. Luke was faster by a heartbeat. His Colt bucked in his hand. Once. Twice. Hayes staggered back, looking down at the spreading red on his chest with surprise. He tried to speak, blood bubbling on his lips, then toppled backward into the dust. The canyon fell silent except for the moans of wounded men. Luke stood slowly, gun still raised, scanning for threats. Hayes's last 2 men had thrown down their weapons, hands high. The battle was over. "Luke!" He turned to see Ayanna sliding down from the rocks, bow still in hand. Relief and anger warred in his chest as she ran to him. "You were supposed to stay with the horses," he said. "You were supposed to come back," she countered, then threw herself into his arms. He held her tight, feeling her heart race against his chest, breathing in the scent of her hair. Around them, Joseph's warriors were securing prisoners and tending wounded. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full cost of the battle. Bodies littered the canyon floor. Mostly Hayes's men, but several Apache had fallen too. "It is done," Joseph said, approaching them. Blood seeped from a graze on his arm, but he stood tall. "Justice for our people." Luke looked down at Hayes's body, waiting to feel something, satisfaction, perhaps, or regret. But there was only emptiness. Another violent chapter closed. More graves to dig in this hard land. What about them? Luke gestured to the two survivors. Joseph's face was stone. They participated in the massacre. They die. No. Ayanna spoke up. Enough blood has been spilled. They killed our people, and now their leader is dead. Their band broken. She faced Joseph squarely. My father believed in ending the cycle of vengeance. Let these two carry word of what happens to those who attack the Apache. Fear can be more powerful than death. Joseph clearly disagreed, but after a long moment, he nodded. For your father's memory, they live, but if we see them again... The threat didn't need finishing. The two outlaws were stripped of weapons and horses, given water and a warning, then sent stumbling out of the canyon on foot. They didn't look back. The rest of the day was spent on grim necessities. The dead were dealt with. Apache warriors prepared for proper burial. Outlaws left for the scavengers. Weapons and supplies were gathered. Luke found Scout and the gray mare where they'd been picketed, whickering nervously but unharmed. As afternoon wore on, Luke found himself standing with Ayanna at the canyon's entrance, looking out at the desert beyond. The battle was won, their immediate enemies defeated, but the question that had haunted them remained. What now? Joseph wants me to return with them, Ayanna said quietly. Says I belong with my people. Luke's chest tightened. What do you want? I don't know. My family is dead, my village destroyed. Joseph's band moves constantly, always running, always fighting. Is that life? What's the alternative? She turned to face him. You tell me, Luke Morgan. Is there a place in your world for an Apache woman? Can we build something together, or will we always be running from one kind of hate or another? Luke thought about it seriously. The truth was hard. There would always be those who saw only their differences, who hated what they represented together, towns that wouldn't welcome them, people who would spit at their feet. But my grandfather came to Texas with nothing but a horse and a dream. He said, built a life from scratch in hostile land. It wasn't easy, but he did it. We could too, find somewhere far from all this. Maybe California, like I told that shopkeeper, place where nobody knows our history. Leave everything behind, everything but each other. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the western mountains. Then, when I was drowning in that river, my last thought was regret, for all the things I'd never do, never see, never feel. You gave me a second chance at life. Perhaps it's time to live it. Is that a yes? She smiled, that rare, radiant expression that transformed her face. Yes, Luke Morgan, though the spirits know why I choose to follow a stubborn cowboy into an uncertain future. Because you can't help yourself, he said, pulling her close. Cowboy rescued the Apache beauty from the rapids. Now she won't stop following him everywhere. She laughed, the sound bright as silver bells. Perhaps it is the other way round. Perhaps the Apache beauty rescued the lonely cowboy from himself. Perhaps she did. They kissed there in the fading light, with the canyon of death behind them and the open desert ahead. It was a promise and a seal, an ending and a beginning. Joseph and his warriors prepared to leave as darkness fell. The Apache leader embraced Ayanna, speaking soft words in their language. Then he turned to Luke. Take care of her. White man. She is the last flower of her family's garden. If you let harm come to her... I won't, Luke said simply. Joseph studied him a moment longer, then nodded. I believe you. May the spirits guide your path. The warriors melted into the darkness, ghosts returning to the shadows. Luke and Ayanna were left alone with their horses and their choices. So, she said, California. California. Though it's a long ride, dangerous too. Good thing I have a protector. Good thing he has you to protect him right back. They made camp away from the canyon, finding clean ground under a cluster of mesquite trees. As they sat by their small fire, planning their route west, Luke felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The past would always be with them, but it no longer defined them. They had chosen each other, chosen a future neither could have imagined when this journey began. No regrets, he asked as they prepared to sleep. Ayanna looked up at the stars, then at him. No regrets, only possibilities. Luke smiled and pulled her close. Tomorrow they would begin the long ride to California, to whatever future waited there. There would be challenges, certainly, hardships and prejudice and 1,000 obstacles to overcome. But tonight, under the vast western sky, with Ayanna warm in his arms, Luke Morgan believed they could face anything. The ghosts were finally quiet. The past was settled, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a new life waited to be built by two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The river had brought them together. Choice would keep them that way. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, an ocean of grass rippling in waves beneath the morning wind. 6 weeks had passed since Skeleton Canyon, 6 weeks of steady travel westward. The horses moved at an easy pace now, no longer driven by pursuit, their riders finally free to appreciate the vast beauty of the land. Luke sat tall in Scout's saddle, watching an eagle circle against the cloudless sky. Beside him, Ayanna rode the gray mare she'd named Storm, moving with a natural grace that still took his breath away. Her wound had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar on her arm, another story written on her skin. There, she pointed to a grove of cottonwoods marking a stream in the distance. Good place to rest. They'd developed an easy rhythm of travel riding mornings and evenings when it was cool, resting during the heat of midday, no longer looking over their shoulders. They could take time to hunt, to gather wild plants, to simply be together without fear. The stream was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. While the horses drank, Luke and Ayanna sat in the dappled shade, sharing dried meat and the last of their coffee. Tomorrow they'd reach Fort Bridger, the last major stop before the final push to California. "Are you ready for this?" Luke asked, knowing she understood his meaning. Fort Bridger meant people, questions, the judgmental eyes of civilization. "I have been thinking," Ayanna said slowly, "about what you said that day, about being Mexican if anyone asks. I will not hide who I am. Luke, not anymore. I'm not asking you to, but people can be cruel, suspicious, full of hate." She smiled sadly. "Yes, I know. But if we begin with lies, where does it end? I am Apache. You are white. We choose to be together. Let them make of that what they will." Luke took her hand. "You're right. No more hiding." They reached Fort Bridger the next afternoon, the wooden stockade rising from the plain like a promise of civilization. The fort bustled with activity. Soldiers, traders, emigrants preparing for the California Trail. Heads turned as Luke and Ayanna rode through the gates. But Luke kept his eyes forward, chin high, at the sutler's store. They resupplied for the final journey. The proprietor, a thin man with nervous eyes, kept glancing at Ayanna as he filled their order. Finally, Luke had enough. "Something troubling you, friend?" The man flushed. "No, sir, just unusual to see. That is, my wife and I are heading to California," Luke said calmly. "That a problem?" "Wife?" The man's eyes widened further. Ayanna stepped forward, her bearing regal despite her simple dress. "Yes, his wife. Now, about that flower?" They completed their purchases under the weight of stares and whispers. Outside, a group of soldiers lounged against the wall. One, a sergeant with sun-faded stripes, called out, "Hey, mister, that your squaw?" Luke's hand moved toward his gun, but Ayanna touched his arm. "Not worth it," she murmured. They mounted and rode on, but the sergeant wasn't finished. "Hope you're keeping a close eye on her. Never know when they might go back to their savage ways." Luke pulled Scout around, meeting the man's eyes. "This woman saved my life more than once. She's got more courage and honor than most men I've known. You'd do well to remember that." The sergeant's face reddened, but something in Luke's eyes made him step back. They rode out of the fort in silence, the weight of civilization's judgment heavy on their shoulders. That night, camped beside the Green River, Ayanna was quiet. Luke could see the day had taken its toll, the cruel reminder of what they'd face in any settlement. "We don't have to do this," he said. "We could go north, into the mountains, live away from all of them." "No." Her voice was firm. "Running is what I've done all my life. From soldiers, from settlers, from men like Hayes. I'm tired of running. Luke, if we're to build a life, let it be in the open, where the sun can find us. It won't be easy. What worth having ever is." She moved to sit beside him, leaning against his shoulder. "Tell me about California. Paint me a picture with words." Luke smiled, wrapping his arm around her. Green valleys between golden hills, air that smells of ocean salt and orange blossoms, rivers full of salmon, forests of redwoods so tall they touch the clouds, land rich enough to grow anything, mild winters, long summers. And prejudice? Hate. That too, he admitted, but also opportunity. New towns growing, people focused on building rather than destroying. Room for those willing to work hard and mind their own business. And us? What will we build? Luke had been thinking about this for weeks. A ranch, maybe. Horses, you're good with them. Better than me. Start small. Build it up. Place where we can be ourselves. Where any children we might have can grow up proud of both their heritages. Children. She said it softly, wonderingly. I had not thought, do you want children, Luke? With you, yes. The certainty in his voice surprised him, though Lord knows it won't be easy for them either. Nothing about our path is easy, but perhaps that will make them strong. They sat quietly, watching the fire die to embers. The river murmured past, carrying mountain snow to distant seas. Stars emerged in all their desert brilliance. The Milky Way, a bright road across the heavens. Luke, Ayanna said eventually, that first day, when you pulled me from the river, did you know? Know what? That it would lead to this, to us. Luke considered. No, I just saw someone drowning and acted, but looking back, maybe some part of me recognized you. Not your face or your name, but you, the person I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. She turned to kiss him, soft and lingering. The spirits work in mysterious ways. The next days blended together in a rhythm of travel. They crossed the Continental Divide at South Pass. So gradual they barely noticed until Luke pointed out that the streams now flowed west instead of east. The landscape changed, sagebrush giving way to scattered pines, the air growing thinner and cleaner. They met other travelers, wagon trains of emigrants, mail riders, freight wagons. Most were too focused on their own journeys to pay much attention to an Apache woman and a white cowboy riding together. Some stared, some whispered, but Luke and Ayanna had learned to let it wash over them like rain. One evening, they came upon a wagon broken down beside the trail. A family man, woman, 3 young children struggled to repair a cracked wheel. Luke and Ayanna exchanged glances, then rode over to help. The man looked up warily as they approached, his hand moving toward a rifle. Then his wife called out, "Oh, thank the Lord. Please, can you help us?" They spent 2 hours helping repair the wheel, Ayanna entertaining the children with stories while Luke and the father worked. When finished, the woman insisted they share supper, simple fare, but seasoned with genuine gratitude. "Where are you folks headed?" the man asked as they ate. "California." Luke replied, "You?" "Same. Oregon didn't work out. Thought we'd try our luck further south." He glanced at Ayanna, who was showing his daughter how to braid grass into a doll. "Your wife?" "Yes." The man nodded slowly. "Takes all kinds to build a new country. I suppose you folks seem decent enough. That's what matters." It was a small thing, that acceptance, but it warmed Luke more than the fire. Perhaps there was hope after all. 2 weeks later, they crested a final ridge and saw it spread before them, the Sacramento Valley. Green and gold in the afternoon sun, mountains rose on all sides. Protective walls around a paradise of grassland and scattered oaks. In the distance, Luke could make out the smoke of settlements, the geometric lines of cultivated fields. "California," he said softly. Ayanna urged Storm up beside him. It's beautiful. Our new home. If you're still sure. She reached over, taking his hand. I have never been more sure of anything. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped.
Horses touching shoulders, looking out at their future. Behind them lay miles of trail, violence and loss, the ghosts of their separate pasts. Ahead waited uncertainty, challenge, the need to carve out a place in a world that might not welcome them. But they would face it together. The river had brought them together. Choice had kept them that way. And love, the word they could finally say aloud, would see them through whatever came next. Ready? Luke asked. Ayanna smiled, that radiant expression he'd come to treasure. With you, always. They rode down into the valley
as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in this vast land, they would build their life, a ranch, a home, a future neither could have imagined when a desperate woman struggled in rapid waters and a lonely cowboy chose to act. The old Luke would have said, half joking. Cowboy rescued the Apache beauty from the rapids. Now she won't stop following him everywhere. But the man riding into California beside the woman he loved knew better. They had rescued each other from loneliness, from hate, from the prison of their pasts. And if they followed each other everywhere, it was by choice. By love, by the promise of all the tomorrows stretching out before them like the trail ahead. The journey from the rapids had ended. Their life together was just beginning, in the dying light, with Ayanna beside him and hope in his heart. Luke Morgan rode toward home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed Luke and Ayanna's journey, please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about their adventure. What touched your heart most about their story?